When I finally woke from the medically induced coma, my world had been sold out from under me. My son, using the power of attorney I'd signed while sedated, had transferred our family home to his in-laws for $1. Standing on my own porch, hearing him say, "It's not yours anymore," broke something in me that no hospital could fix. But they forgot one thing. My grandfather didn't just build this house, he built in protections. What I found hidden in the foundation didn't just reclaim my home. It exposed every lie they'd built their new lives upon. The last thing I remembered clearly was the crushing pain in my chest, like an elephant sitting on my sternum, and my son Leo's terrified face swimming above me as the ambulance lights strobed blue and red against our living room ceiling. 28 days later, the scent of hospital antiseptic had seeped into my pores. It lingered in my nasal passages as I stood on the cracked pavement of Hawthorne Street, gripping the small plastic bag containing my belongings, wallet, watch, and the phone that had gone mostly silent during my stay at St. Agnes Medical Center. The Victorian house my grandfather had built stood before me, its gingerbread trim freshly painted a crisp white, the wraparound porch sagging in the familiar, comforting way it had for nearly a century. The rose bushes my wife, Mary Ann, had planted 20 years ago were bursting with crimson blooms. But something was immediately, viscerally wrong. The wrought iron boot scraper, shaped like a terrier Mary Ann's whimsical find at a flea market, was gone from beside the top step. In its place sat a glossy ceramic pot containing a rigid, ornamental grass, and the welcome mat, the one that read, "The Millers established 1981" in faded blue letters, had been replaced by a stark, modern mat in geometric black and white. A tremor began in my hands, unrelated to the heart medication thrumming through my system. I fumbled for the keys on my Ring the Chevrolet key. The truck was probably still in the hospital lot, the post office box key, and the two familiar bronze keys to my front door. The word home had been my mantra during the long, fuzzy days of recovery. Just get home. My son Leo had been vague but reassuring during his brief visits. "Don't worry about a thing, Dad. Just focus on getting better. Mara and I are holding down the fort." Holding down the fort. I'd pictured them watering Mary Ann's roses, collecting my mail, maybe airing out the rooms. A comforting thought. I slotted the older key into the deadbolt above the knob. It didn't turn. I jiggled it gently, thinking my weakened hands were failing me. Nothing. Puzzled, I tried the key for the knob lock itself. It turned a bare quarter-inch and jammed solid. A cold, dense knot formed in my stomach. I leaned closer. Around the keyhole, the antique brass was marred by a constellation of fresh, silver scratches. The locks had been changed. My eyes darted to the front bay window. Mary Ann's lace curtains, which she'd hung to filter the morning sun into soft diamonds on the hardwood floor, were gone. In their place were heavy, olive green drapes, drawn tightly shut. The rational part of my brain, the part that had taught high school English for 35 years, scrambled for explanations. A burglary? Leo upgrading security while I was away. But why wouldn't he tell me? Why wouldn't he give me the new key? I pressed the doorbell, hearing the familiar two-tone chime echo inside. Footsteps approached, but they weren't Leo's quick, light tread. These were heavier, slower, with a slight shuffle. The door opened not on my son's concerned face, but on the imposing, unsmiling figure of Mara's father, Robert Thorne. He filled the doorway. A broad-shouldered man in his late 60s who had always surveyed my book-cluttered, slightly shabby home with the polite disdain of a museum curator looking at a folk art exhibit. "Henry, you're out," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a statement, devoid of warmth or surprise. He didn't step aside to let me in. "Robert, what's going on? Is Leo here?" My voice sounded thin and reedy to my own ears, still weakened from the intubation. "My key isn't working." "Locks were changed," Robert said, crossing his arms over his chest. He was wearing a monogrammed velvet house robe, My robe, I realized with a jolt. The dark blue one Marianne had given me for my last birthday before she got sick. Security upgrade. Leo and Mara are at the home center. You should have called ahead. Before I could process this, a silver SUV Mara's SUV pulled into the driveway. Leo emerged from the passenger side, carrying a bag from a hardware store. Mara, his wife of for years, hurried around from the driver's side, her blonde ponytail swinging. My son's eyes, the same sea green as Marianne's, met mine across the lawn. For a fleeting second, I saw a gut punch of guilt and panic. Then he looked away, focusing on the bag in his hands as if it contained state secrets. His face was pale. Dad, they released you. He walked up the path, his eyes fixed on the ground between us. Dr. Sharma cleared me this morning. I texted you, I said, the cold knot in my stomach turning to a sheet of ice. I'd sent that text 3 hours ago. Heading home. So grateful for you. Mara stepped forward, a tight, performative smile stretching her lips. Henry, what a surprise. We thought you had another week of rehab. Come in, come in. Her tone was all false brightness, the kind she used at awkward family gatherings. Robert finally moved aside, but his presence in the doorway felt more like a blockade being temporarily lifted than an invitation. They herded me into my own foyer. The change hit me like a physical blow. The walnut hall tree where we'd hung coats for decades was gone. The framed map of the world where Marianne had traced our dream vacations with pushpins was missing from the wall. The air smelled different of lemon-scented polish and a cloying plug-in air freshener, covering the familiar, comforting scent of old wood, books, and the faint, ghostly trace of Marianne's lavender sachets. They directed me into the living room. My leather armchair, the one positioned perfectly for reading by the afternoon light from the west window, was simply not there. In its place was a low-slung, angular chaise lounge upholstered in cream fabric. It looked as comfortable as a slab of granite. My floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, which had held everything from my complete Shakespeare collection to Leo's childhood encyclopedias, had been ruthlessly cleared. A few of the shelves now displayed minimalist ceramic vases and clustered frames holding photos of the Thorns, Robert and his wife, Sylvia on various golf courses, Mara as a cheerleader, their family posing in matching white sweaters. Sit down, Dad, Leo said, his voice low. He remained standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot, the hardware store bag still clutched in his hand like a shield. Leo, what is happening? I asked, my own voice trembling now. Why are the locks changed? Where is my chair? Where are my books? Mara let out a sigh, as if burdened by a difficult but necessary task. She placed a hand on Leo's forearm. Henry, while you were so sick, we had to make some really hard decisions. The future, it's just so uncertain. The medical bills are staggering. This big, old house, the upkeep, the property taxes. Leo and I moved in to keep an eye on things, but it's been a massive burden. We've decided the most responsible thing is to transfer the property for long-term stability. I stared at her, then at my son. The words seemed to come from a great distance, in a language I only half understood. Transfer, to whom? Leo finally looked at me. In his green eyes, I saw a terrifying cocktail of shame, defiance, and a grim, settled resolve that made my blood run cold. To Mara's parents, they've paid off the remaining mortgage. They own the house now. It's theirs. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the loud ticking of the grandmother clock in the hall, a clock that had been in my family for 5 generations. Theirs? You gave my house away. The whisper was all I could manage. We saved it, Henry, Robert interjected from the archway to the dining room. He had poured himself a glass of my scotch, I noticed. The good single malt from the decanter on the sideboard. From being swallowed by debt and probate court. Leo had durable power of attorney from the hospital paperwork. It was all legal. Above board. You should be thanking him for being so proactive. The room seemed to tilt. I reached out to steady myself on the back of the hideous chaise. This is my home. Marianne's and mine. We raised Leo here. My grandfather built it with his own hands. For 92 years, it's never been out of family hands. The dizziness from my medication was cresting, but it was nothing compared to the vertigo of betrayal. Leo's face hardened. The sweet, curious boy I'd taught to catch fireflies in the backyard was gone, replaced by this tense, unfamiliar man. It's done, Dad. The papers are signed. The deed is recorded. This isn't your house anymore. Sylvia Thorne, Maura's mother, glided in from the kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a check dish towel that I recognized with a pang. Marianne had bought it on our trip to Normandy. Henry, dear, let's be practical, she said, her voice a syrupy patina over steel. You've had a major cardiac event. You're not well. You need consistent care. We've found a wonderful assisted living community, Silver Birches. Leo has all the brochures. It has a lovely library and organized bridge games. I looked from her placid, certain face to Robert's smug expression, to Maura's look of impatient expectancy, and finally to my son. Leo was staring at a specific point on the hardwood floor. The floor his mother had painstakingly refinished one summer, his jaw working. The betrayal wasn't just a knife in the back. It was an amputation. They had sawed off my past and my future in one clean, legal stroke. Get out? Leo's voice cracked on the second word. He cleared his throat, forcing a steely authority into it that rang utterly false. Please, Dad, don't make this harder. It's no longer yours. Don't come in. They didn't lay hands on me. They didn't need to. Robert moved to the front door and held it open, a silent, imperious sentinel. Sylvia's smile didn't waver. Maura looked away, studying her nails. Leo refused to meet my gaze. I walked out onto my own porch. The spring sunshine, which should have felt like a blessing, now felt harsh and exposing. I heard the solid, definitive thunk of the new deadbolt engaging behind me. The sound was a full stop at the end of the life I knew. I stood there for 5 minutes, maybe 10, rooted to the spot. The terrier boot scraper was gone. My mat was gone. My key didn't work. My chair was gone. My son was gone. Finally, I turned and walked down the steps, my legs moving on autopilot. I had nowhere to go. The Starlight Motel on the highway bypass lived up to its name only in the sense that its flickering vacancy sign was vaguely star-shaped. Room 114 smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The roar of semi-trucks shifting gears on the nearby interstate was a constant, grinding dirge. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the plastic bag from the hospital at my feet. Shock was a thick blanket, muting the pain. But underneath it, grief began to uncoil, a visceral, physical ache that started in my hollowed chest and radiated outwards. I grieved for the house itself, every creaky floorboard, every sun-dappled windowsill, every memory etched into its walls. I grieved for Marianne, whose spirit felt so violently evicted. Her garden out back, her kitchen where she'd hummed off-key while making pies, the window seat where she'd read to Leo, all of it was now being curated, erased, or sold off by the Thorns. I grieved for the future I'd imagined, a quiet, slow-paced life of puttering in the garden, rereading my favorite novels, maybe watching Leo start a family of his own, watching his children chase lightning bugs in that same backyard. But most of all, I grieved for Leo. The betrayal was a black hole, sucking in every good memory, teaching him to ride his bike on that very driveway, wobbling then triumphantly pedaling away, helping him build a treehouse in the old oak, his small hands passing me nails, sitting up with him the night before his wedding, both of us too nervous to sleep, talking about love and commitment over lukewarm cocoa. I had signed the power of attorney papers in a blur of fear and morphine, a gesture of ultimate trust. You handle things, son. He had become the steward of my life, and he had sold the keystone of it for $1. The anger arrived on the second day, sharp and clean, cutting through the fog of grief. I was a man of words and history, not confrontation. But I was not a naive man. Survival instinct, honed by loss and illness, kicked in. My first stop was the county courthouse, a granite fortress of bureaucracy. I felt small and insubstantial in its echoing halls. With numb fingers, I requested the property records for 1842 Hawthorne Street. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, brought me a microfiche printout. There it was, in stark, bureaucratic black and white. A quitclaim deed filed 2 weeks prior. Grantor, Henry Joseph Miller, by his attorney in fact, Leo Thomas Miller. Grantee, Robert James Thorne and Sylvia Ann Thorne. Consideration, $1 and love and affection. There was an attached rider. Life estate reserved for Leo Thomas Miller and Mara Elizabeth Thorne Miller. $1. The ultimate insult. They hadn't even pretended it was a fair market transaction. The power of attorney, which was meant to allow Leo to pay my bills or manage my investments, had been weaponized. The life estate clause was the sugar-coating letting Leo and Mara live there, making him complicit in his own theft, tying him to them. I made a photocopy, the machine whirring like a mechanical vulture. The sound of it felt like the copying of my own death certificate. My next stop was the office of Arthur Brinkley, an old friend and the only lawyer I knew. Art had been 2 years ahead of me in school and had a reputation for being tenacious, if occasionally unorthodox. His office was a comforting chaos of legal books and framed fishing photos. He read the deed in silence, his bushy white eyebrows climbing higher with each line. He let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to come from his shoes. "Henry, this is ugly. Can they do this?" My voice was calmer than I felt. If the POA is valid and broadly worded, and hospital forms often are, then technically, yes. He had the legal authority to transfer the property, Art said, taking off his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. The $1 thing is a giant red flag for undue influence, or lack of fair consideration. But they'll argue it was a family arrangement to avoid probate and secure funds for your care. We could challenge your mental capacity when you sign the POA, but that's a he said. They said medical battle. It's long, it's expensive, and it's public. You'd be dragging your son through the mud. That man, I said, the words ice cold and certain, is not my son. Not anymore. Art studied me, his legal detachment giving way to personal concern. What do you want, Henry? Do you want the house back, or do you want to punish him? I thought of the ceramic grass, the olive drapes, Robert in my robe. I thought of Marianne's ghost, bewildered in her own home. I want what's mine, and I want them to understand they took something they could never truly own. Art laid out the options: a civil suit for elder financial abuse, a challenge to the deed based on the exploitative consideration, a petition to invalidate the POA. Each path was a grueling marathon with an uncertain finish line. My savings, a teacher's pension, and a modest nest egg would be devoured by legal fees within a year. As I left his office, the sharp anger began to mutate, to cool and harden into something else, a meticulous, calculating resolve. A court battle would be fought on their chosen battlefield: lawyers, paperwork, motions. It would drain me financially and emotionally. I was a history teacher. I knew that sometimes, to win a war, you needed a different kind of strategy. You needed intelligence. You needed a secret the enemy didn't know they were sitting on. My father, a quiet, practical mason, had a saying: the true strength of a building, Henry, isn't in the fancy trim or the fresh paint. It's in the foundation stones no one sees, and in the secrets they hold. And I knew a secret about the foundation of 1842 Hawthorne Street, a secret my grandfather had shared with my father, who had shared it with me on his deathbed, a secret I had never, ever thought I'd need to use. A week to the day after my exile, I found myself standing in the dappled shadow of the large sycamore tree across the street from my home. I wore a nondescript baseball cap and kept my posture slumped, an old man out for a slow stroll. The thorns had settled in with appalling speed. Robert was out front, not just pressure washing my driveway, but using a paint sprayer to touch up the trim on the porch railing, a chore I'd been meaning to get to for 2 summers. Sylvia was on the back deck, visible from the side yard, supervising the delivery of a large, expensive-looking wrought iron patio set. Mora's SUV was in the driveway, but Leo's sedan was gone. Back at his tech job, I presumed, funding the new life his betrayal had purchased. I waited until mid-morning, when the neighborhood rhythm was at its quietest. School runs over, first errands done. I didn't approach the front door. I walked down the narrow service alley that ran behind the properties on our block, the one used for trash collection. The wooden gate to my backyard was now secured with a heavy-duty hasp and a shiny new combination padlock. A small, grim smile touched my lips. Of course. I continued to the very back of the property line, where my yard met the Andersons. Here, the old redwood fence, built by my grandfather, was warped and bowed with decades of weather. When Leo was 15, he discovered that if you pressed hard on the third board from the corner post, a nail head gave way just enough to create a gap for a skinny teenager to slip through. He'd used it to sneak out to meet friends. I'd known about it. Parents always know more than their kids think, but I'd never called him on it. It felt like a rite of passage. Some things, it seemed, never changed. I applied pressure. The board yielded with a familiar creak. I was thinner now, after the hospital. I slipped through the gap with ease, my heart pounding not from exertion, but from the surreal, trespassing thrill of entering my own life. The backyard was a wound. My sprawling, messy, productive vegetable garden, Marianne's pride and my therapy, was gone. The raised beds had been ripped out. In their place was a perfect circle of pristine gray pavers, surrounding a gas fire pit, complete with fake, stackable logs. In the far corner, under the old oak, stood a bright red plastic swing set, its cheerful emptiness a presumptuous promise for a future that might never come. They were erasing us and imprinting themselves with terrifying efficiency. I moved quickly to the rear of the house. The exterior basement doors, the bulkhead, were now barricaded with a hefty steel crossbar secured by another serious lock. They were thorough, I'd give them that. They were securing the obvious points of entry. They didn't know about the unobvious one. When my grandfather, Samuel Miller, built the house in 1930, it was originally heated by a coal furnace. The coal was delivered via a chute on the side of the house, which dumped directly into a bin in the cellar. By the time Marianne and I bought the house from my aging parents in the late 70s, the furnace had long been converted to oil, and the coal chute had been boarded up and sided over. During a basement renovation in our second year, trying to stop a persistent damp patch, I knocked through some old lath and plaster and discovered the original cast iron coal chute door, still set into the stone foundation. It was a small, arched thing, about 2 feet high and 18 inches wide, rusted shut. On a whim, instead of sealing it behind the new drywall, I'd cleaned the hinges, oiled them, and left it accessible behind a false panel in the storage room. A piece of history, a quirky secret. I'd shown it to a wide-eyed 7-year-old Leo during a game of pirates. Every proper castle needs a secret passage, Captain, I'd said. He'd been delighted. He'd forgotten. He'd forgotten the story, forgotten the door. He'd forgotten so much. Now, hidden behind a thick, decades-old curtain of Boston ivy that clung to the north foundation wall, the outline of the small door was just a subtle irregularity. I pulled on the work gloves I'd brought and used a small pry bar to clear the vines and dig at the dirt. that had accumulated at its base. Finding the hidden latch, a simple iron lever crusted with rust, took fumbling minutes. I pulled. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a shudder and a groan that sounded like the house itself protesting, the small door swung inward a few inches. A wave of cool, damp, earth-scented air washed over me. The opening was a black rectangle, barely large enough to crawl through. Spiderwebs glistened across it like beaded curtains. This was it, the point of no return. I flipped on my heavy-duty flashlight, took a breath that did nothing to calm my racing heart, and got down on my hands and knees. The crawl through the coal chute was a descent into a primal darkness. Cobwebs brushed my face like ghostly fingers, and the smell was of undisturbed earth, wet stone, and the faint, metallic tang of old iron. My flashlight beam cut a shaky path ahead, illuminating the rough-hewn fieldstone of the foundation, each stone placed by my grandfather's hands. The passage was short, maybe 8 feet, but it felt like a journey back through time. I emerged into the main cellar, my flashlight sweeping across a scene that stole my breath. The cavernous space, once a chaotic museum of my life-old furniture, canning supplies, Christmas decorations, was now a sterile, organized warehouse of my exile. Neat, uniform cardboard boxes were stacked in precise rows, each labeled with a black marker in Marat's efficient script. Henry's books, fiction. Henry's clothes, misc, kitchen, photo, albums. They had packed me away with the cold efficiency of professional movers, categorizing a lifetime into manageable units for storage or disposal. A fresh wave of grief hit me, but I batted it down. I wasn't here for sentiment. I was here for the sword. I moved to the farthest, dankest corner, behind the hulking, silent form of the original furnace, now a dormant iron beast. This section of the wall had never been finished. The fieldstone foundation was exposed here, the mortar rough and uneven. My father's dying words, whispered when I was 40 and he was 82, came back to me with crystal clarity. The hearthstone of the home, Henry, 4 up, 3 over from the southeast corner. Your grandfather's quiet insurance, only for true peril. I'd always thought he was speaking metaphorically, his mind softened by age and pain. Now, kneeling on the cold dirt floor, I understood. I used the flashlight to find the southeast corner of the foundation wall. From the floor, I counted 4 stones up. My finger traced the rough mortar to the 3rd stone from the corner. It looked no different from its neighbors, a flat, gray piece of local granite. But when I pressed the edge of my pry bar into the mortar surrounding it, it crumbled more easily. A mixture that was sandier, less durable. My breath fogged in the cold air as I worked, wiggling the bar, applying careful pressure. With a final gritty scrape, the stone shifted. I got my fingers into the gap and pulled. It came free, heavier than it looked. Behind it was not a hollow, but a small, deliberately carved niche. And inside, wrapped in oilcloth that was itself inside a sealed metal tube, was my grandfather's quiet insurance. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I didn't open it there. The cellar felt too exposed, too violated. Clutching the tube to my chest, I replaced the stone as best I could. The disturbed mortar, a telltale sign I hoped would go unnoticed amidst the general disorder of stacked boxes. The journey back out felt longer, the weight of the metal tube and its implications pressing on me. I resealed the coal chute door, rearranged the ivy, and slipped back through the fence like a ghost. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a grave robber of my own history. Back in the bleak motel room, under the jaundiced glow of a single lamp, I finally opened the tube. The oilcloth unfolded to reveal not one, but several documents. The first was indeed the original land grant, dated 1879. It wasn't from a state governor, but from the county land office, granting parcel 17B, Hawthorne Tract to one Alastair Miller, for services rendered and in recognition of settlement. The script was flowing, the paper thick and linen-based, bearing an official wax seal that was still partially intact. But it was the second, typed document, clipped to the grant, that held the power. It was a declaration of restrictive covenant, dated 1930, the year my grandfather built the house. It was signed by my grandfather, Samuel Miller, and notarized. The language was legalese, but its meaning was stark. The undersigned, being the sole owner in fee simple of the property herein described, does hereby covenant and restrict said property for himself, his heirs, executors, and assigns, in perpetuity, as follows: that title to said land and any structures thereon shall not pass, by sale, gift, devise, or operation of law, to any person or persons not of the direct lineal blood descent of the original grantee, Alastair Miller, unless such transfer is consented to in writing by all living, competent descendants of said Alastair Miller who have reached the age of majority. This covenant is intended to run with the land and bind all future owners. Any attempt to transfer title in violation of this covenant shall be null and void of initio. Beneath it were two more recent papers, a 1955 letter from a law firm confirming the covenant had been reviewed and was unusual, but likely enforceable as a private hereditary restriction, and a 1978 affidavit from my father, signed after my grandfather's death, reaffirming the covenant's existence and his knowledge of it. It wasn't a royal land grant with a governor's signature. It was something more personal, more deliberate. My grandfather, a pragmatic Mason, hadn't trusted banks or governments. He'd created his own law, bricked it into the very bones of the house to keep it in the family bloodline. He'd foreseen greed, foreseen discord, and had built a legal trapdoor. Leo had violated it twice over. He was of the bloodline, but he had attempted to transfer title to non-descendants, the Thorns, without the written consent of all living descendants, which was just me, and he'd done it while purporting to act for me, the one person whose consent was paramount. For the first time since I'd stood on my porch, a genuine, fierce hope ignited in my chest. This wasn't just a moral argument. This was a specific, legal shackle on the property they knew nothing about. Arthur Brinkley's office felt different now. The chaos was the same, but the air crackled with potential energy. Art held the covenant pages with the reverence of a scholar handling a Dead Sea Scroll. "Well, I'll be a son of a gun," he breathed, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Samuel Miller, you crafty old fox. A private restrictive covenant tied to lineal descent. It's almost feudal. Will it hold up?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "It's not a common weapon, Henry, but it's a legitimate one," Art said, his legal mind racing. "Restrictive covenants can run with the land in perpetuity if they're properly drafted and recorded. This one wasn't recorded in the main deed book, which is why a title search wouldn't have found it. That's a point against us. But the fact that it exists, was notarized, was known to successive generations and reaffirmed. That gives it tremendous weight. It shows a clear, continuous intent." He tapped the 1955 letter. "And this opinion from Hargrove and Finch, they were a prestigious firm. This is golden." He insisted we get a historical property expert to authenticate the age and nature of the documents. That led me to Dr. Eliza Chen, a severe, brilliant professor of local history at the university. In her cluttered office, surrounded by maps and archival boxes, she examined the papers under a magnifying lamp. "The 1879 grant is absolutely genuine," she confirmed. "The paper, the ink, the seal. The 1930 covenant. The typing is consistent with a period Underwood machine. The notary seal is valid for that year. The signature matches Samuel Miller's on other documents I've seen." She looked at me over her glasses. "Your grandfather was creating a family trust without the lawyers, Mr. Miller. He was binding the land to your blood. It was a very possessive view of property. not uncommon among early 20th century artisans who built their own homes. They saw them as literal extensions of their lineage. Is it enforceable? I asked the question that haunted me. As a historical document, it's pristine, she said. As a legal instrument, that's for the courts, but its intent is unmistakable. It was meant to prevent exactly what has happened. With Dr. Chen's written authentication in hand, Art went to work. He drafted a complaint to quiet title, based on the breach of the restrictive covenant. The core argument was simple: Leo Miller, while a descendant, could not unilaterally override a covenant that required the consent of all living descendants for a transfer to non-descendants. His power of attorney did not grant him the authority to waive a property right that was personal to me and inherent to the land itself. The sale to the Thorns was therefore void. He also filed a lis pendens, a notice of pending lawsuit on the property. As he explained, this puts the world on notice that the title is in dispute. They can't sell it, they can't refinance it. It's a cloud on their ownership that will scare off any bank or beer. It freezes everything. The papers were served the next day. Art warned me to expect a furious reaction. It came that evening in the form of a phone call from an unknown number. I answered, my hand steady. "Henry, it's Robert." His voice was a controlled snarl. All pretense of civility gone. "What is this nonsense? Some fairy tale about a magic piece of paper? You're embarrassing yourself. Withdraw this lawsuit immediately or I will countersue you for slander, defamation, and malicious prosecution. You will be buried in legal fees." "The document is real, Robert," I said, my voice calm. "The covenant is valid. You paid $1 for a house you were never eligible to own. Withdraw from the property, and we can avoid further unpleasantness." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You senile old fool. That scrap of paper wouldn't stand up in traffic court. My lawyer is already preparing a motion to dismiss and for sanctions against you and that ambulance chaser Brinkley. You've just signed your own ticket to a state-run nursing home." The line went dead. I sat in the motel room, the silence buzzing. The battle lines were drawn. The Thorns' housewarming party was scheduled for the following Saturday. Clara's social media, which she'd thoughtlessly left public, was a barrage of excited posts. "Can't wait to fill our new home with friends and laughter. So grateful to my amazing parents for this fresh start." The photos showed the living room draped in bunting, a caterer's table being set up, the new patio furniture arranged just so. Leo was tagged in none of them. The day before the party, Art called. They filed their motion to dismiss. Standard stuff. That it's racially neutral but functionally discriminatory. That it was never recorded, and is therefore unenforceable against bona fide purchasers, which they claim to be. Judge Weathers has scheduled an initial hearing for next month. But Henry, they also filed a motion for a psychiatric evaluation of you, claiming you're delusional and unfit to manage your own affairs, trying to use this fantasy document to undo a legitimate transaction for your own care. The audacity took my breath away. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent, to make me the villain and the lunatic. "What do we do?" I asked. "We fight," Art said, his voice grim. "And we show the court exactly who these people are. Their motion reeks of bad faith, but we need to demonstrate that publicly." That was when the idea crystallized. The party, their public celebration of their theft. It was the perfect stage. "Don't do anything rash, Henry," Art cautioned, sensing my resolve. "I'm just going to deliver a housewarming gift, Art," I said. "The truth."